Hello, everyone. Dr. Eames here. This time I'd like to talk to you about managing staff and service volunteers. Now, first of all, if we want to be successful in adding volunteer workers to our mix, we've got to understand a few things. We certainly have to understand their motivations for volunteering, and we will also want to know the specific best practices that experts recommend so that we make that productive mixed workforce as productive as possible. One place we can start is recognizing that the techniques we use for management and leadership to motivate workers are the same for volunteers. Um, some of the motivations for volunteers and workers may differ, but the overall process of managing them as workers remains the same. We really have a couple types of volunteers. When we really think about nonprofit organizations, we have to really know that they do make up, for many nonprofits, a major component of the workforce. So we have service volunteers versus policy volunteers. Now, volunteers who actually perform some labor hold specific positions in a nonprofit. Those are the service volunteers. They're really helping you push your mission forward, and providing whatever service that might be. These are the people helping other people or just helping out in the office or whatever that job title might be. Now, policy volunteers are different. They serve on boards and councils and advocacy commissions and things like that. So they're not really involved in the day-to-day delivering of any types of services or anything. So they are very much policy volunteers. Now, service volunteers, therefore, work alongside regular staff, and policy volunteers do not. So the focus of our discussions really is going to be on service volunteers. Um, there are types of service volunteers out there. The spot volunteer, the participation is casual, usually not repeated. It might have been a spur of the moment decision, something like that. The episodic volunteer will often show up for a special event. And if they get a good sense that they enjoyed themselves, got something out of it, and feel they contributed and moved the mission forward, then they might volunteer that next time you hold the event. So episodic volunteers are very much relied upon for so many nonprofits because uh, many nonprofits have to hold events and revenue earning sorts of income driving events. Regular volunteers, well, they serve essentially as unpaid staff. They're the volunteers, a service volunteer type that shows up every day for work, just like a regular worker. They have a job title, they have hours, they are managed and assessed just like any other employee. The only difference being that they are unpaid. And we have marginal volunteers out there. Now, these marginal volunteers do not necessarily want to be there. They've either been strongly encouraged to be there or they've been mandated to volunteer. Now, there are some high schools around the country, here and there, that mandate some sort of public service as a condition to graduate. So that would be a marginal volunteer. It's been mandated. They have to do it. They don't really have much choice in it if they want to get their high school diploma. And the same is true sometimes for court-ordered charity or community service. And this is mandated also. The judge says you have to do it, and you have to do so many hours of it, and it's monitored and kept track of and so forth. These marginal volunteers, again, obviously, wouldn't normally be there. And they are going to contribute. They're going to do it while they're there. And you never know. Just some of them may get a good enough feeling from doing it that they may turn into some sort of spot or episodic volunteer later. So there are all sorts of theories that managers and leaders use to try and understand the workforce and any given person within that workforce. And these are discussed heavily in most management courses, particularly in fundamentals of management and so forth. And this is generally a review for us. We have our need theories. And so we're talking about individuals like Maslow with his hierarchy of needs pyramid, where the notion is that people have to fulfill their most basic needs and wants before they can move up to more complex needs and solving those, such as social interaction and personal advancement and so forth. You must have the basics down, like survival, a place to live, wages, food, all of those sorts of things. Need theories from Maslow and his hierarchy pyramid. We have Alderfer with his ERG theory. We have McGregor with his theory X and Y, which really is a theory about managers and their attitudes towards workers. Theory X, of course, being a very negative view in general of workers, and theory Y being the opposite, a fairly enlightened and positive view of workers. Herzberg also has a need theory. He's in there with his satisfaction versus dissatisfaction, with the notion that business is not there, whether you're for profit or nonprofit, to make people happy. You're there while people are there working together to ensure that they are not dissatisfied. The assumption is that people are just too complex. You can't make them happy, and you shouldn't be trying to. You're either there in the case of a nonprofit to pursue your mission, or you're there in a for-profit to pursue some type of revenue. So you just want to prevent dissatisfaction from sinking in, and you want to actually provide an experience at work that is full of satisfaction. And it's accepted that that is the best way to go because it really accepts a realistic view of human behavior. We also have McClellan with his achievement, power, and affiliation factors. Those are needs that people need to fulfill. And he's the one that really comes forth from a revision of Maslow's theories, other than the others, and adds that power component to the things that motivate people. Well, we also have expectancy theories like the one from Jerome, where people are constantly looking for what is going to happen when I make a decision, and they compare themselves to their peers and to other workers and so forth. And so the notion is that how hard we work and how badly we want things really depends on the outcomes and the things that we expect to get out of it if we put in that hard work and effort. Um, Goal theories are about setting goals and milestones along the way to get to bigger goals so that we actually achieve our missions. And goals are very motivational, particularly when you handle them in a way that increases enthusiasm and motivation and so forth, particularly in a group setting. But goals work on the individual level as well as the group level. And then we also have a variety of equity theories that are also about motivation. Adams is one about fairness and effort, how we're always comparing ourselves and our effort to the level of reward that we're getting. And then we're comparing that to the coworker and saying, are they working harder or lesser or less hard than we are? And are they getting the same reward or a less reward or a bigger reward and so forth? It's the idea that we all would expect things to be balanced, that and that people do change their behavior on their perception or interpretation of the fairness in any given situation. So those particular theories are all about understanding what motivates workers, whether they're in a nonprofit setting or a volunteer working for no pay or a for-profit worker. It doesn't matter. People are people, and these motivation theories give us a tool to understand behavior and hopefully make the best decisions. And there are other things that we can talk about. Operant behavior isn't something we're going to practice in the workplace in a nonprofit, certainly. It's about reinforcement theories and so forth. And often one of the biggest names associated with this would be a scholar, scientist named Skinner, who often felt that it was best to use drugs to sort of get the behavior you want from people, and that we ought to use punishment if we really want to get the sort of outcome we want in very extreme circumstances and so forth. And the idea is behaviors that result in punishment are much less likely to be repeated. Most of the time in the workplace in particular, we're certainly not going to go that far. Um, We do really look at theories in the workplace today, and what's taught in most modern management classes is that participative management is indeed leadership, and that is really what we would hope to achieve in most organizations, where people work together. It's a form of motivation and empowerment. It does work, but it takes a particular skill and effort on the part of everyone, and it is about teamwork. We also have to accept that workers, people, leaders, also our clients and consumers who we serve are motivated by different things at different stages in their life. So the life of themselves and also the life stage of the organization in particular can make a big difference. Life stages happen in organizations just like they do in people. Um, Organizations are formed. Sometimes they have incredible enthusiasm. They pursue a certain set of goals and missions. And then over time, they gain experience. They revise what they're doing. Their mission has changed somewhat. Their goals have changed a little bit also. And they're pursuing different things when they're in a more mature setting of the endeavors they've been following for a while than they were in the beginning. And then indeed that they might be motivated differently if an organization is in decline and so forth. So when you apply this sort of thinking to people, then really we can look at generational cohorts. And these are just generational things that we can say about any large group of people. Keeping in mind, of course, that we don't want to develop stereotypical attitudes about generations. And that is certainly the one real pitfall that we have to avoid. We have to use this information as a tool. That is, this is a maybe. This probably or could happen or it might happen. But we can't assume that any particular given behavior is going to be there or exhibited by any given individual based on their generational cohort. Having said that, the information about cohorts is very useful. It rings true to so many of us in very general ways. So this is about differences in life and differences in the population group that we were born into and how those things that we've experienced have shaped us. Indeed, our life has shaped us differently because we were born in a different time. So these things, though, are useful to us, the understanding these generational differences, just like understanding theories of motivation based on wants and needs and so forth. Well, there's a large body of knowledge out there that also looks at all of this and says we can integrate thinking from all of this and take any of these given theories and any of these ways to approach leadership and management and integrate them and use them all as different lenses or perspectives to pursue the type of leadership style or the type of organization or culture or whatever it is that we want to create. So these theories are useful to us and so forth. And they really do help us get a handle on understanding the worker. And that's really what it's all about, is understanding the worker so that we can make better decisions and work with them better. So here are some things that we could talk about as generational motivators. As you can see, here are 4 key generational cohorts. The traditionalists, and you will find that textbooks and scholars and articles are going to refer to maybe slightly different labels, and that maybe the time frames may not start and stop exactly the same all the time. Although you would have to say pretty much today, the traditionalists, people born before 1945, the seniors in our society today, and so forth. Baby boomers, those dates are fairly settled because it's been around a while, and marketers and historians and scholars of all types have done a lot of research on it. So you can see when baby boomers, because there was a baby boom in American population right after World War II. So we're talking 1946, and most scholars are accepting right around 1970. Well, then we got Generation X, which was really the first children born to the baby boomer generation in general. And quite often, because we're looking at things that shape these populations and so forth, in order to understand them, Gen X were often latchkey kids. There was a high divorce rate amongst the first marriages of baby boomers, there was a whole generation of kids born. And then later, many of these people recombined families and so forth and had more children who later became generally millennials. Gen Y was a label that was used for quite some time and is still occasionally out there in use, but generally now Gen Y is considered to be millennials. And the millennial group is just a little bit, started a little bit earlier than was originally thought, and it is the largest group today, replacing the baby boomers, who are always the largest group before that. And as you can see on the right-hand side of this graphic, the sorts of traditional characteristics that members of these different groups would exhibit and so forth. And then you can see the sorts of events that cause them to be the way they are, that shape their lives. And so you can tell that all these groups are quite different in the things that happen to them and the things that shape their lives. And there's no need for me to reiterate and go through these in great detail, but it's pretty clear, I think, once you start to look through them, that this is quite true. So there are different motivators because of the differences in these population groups. So the things that motivate the baby boomers are going to be things like recognition and plaques or certificates. Baby boomers have always, as a group in general, liked recognition for the things that they've done. They would also appreciate and like development opportunities. I just talked a little bit about Gen X. They value social events with friends and family, a lot of them because they were single children or children with single parents, of divorced parents, and so forth. Millennials are much more social. They were born when the online world was beginning, so they appreciate online recognition and the tools of the new technology and the online world, gift cards, and they appreciate the chance to do things on the internet and use that technology. And then today we even have a newer generation, Gen Z. Scholars are sort of settling on when did this generation start, but I think most are starting to agree it was around the year 2000. All of those people born from 2000 on probably are going to be considered Gen Z at some point. And just think the differences between Gen Z and the millennials are also huge, because Gen Z is born into a world where things are not just on the internet and wireless, they're mobile, they're 5G, everything is fast, there's never anything slow anymore, and so forth. So they don't know about storage mediums for music and movies and things. I mean, they know about them, but they haven't experienced them much, of going through tape and CDs and DVDs to now entertainment, music, movies, everything is becoming much more accessible because it's being streamed. So things, different factors are really influencing volunteers and motivating them to do whatever it is you're trying to get them to do. And so you really want to pay attention to those things. Understand why the volunteer might be coming to you. They might be, very much motivated by your mission, and they may have a personal connection to whatever it is that you're trying to help or achieve, or the group you're trying to help, or the environment, or whatever it might be. If that mission resonates with them for some personal reason, and they have an emotional connection, then it's valid. And that might be enough to get them to choose you. Now, the desire might be there also. Maybe the desire is there to advance a cause or just to help out in general. Many people, when they get older and they've accomplished something good in their lives, they have more time, and sometimes they just feel a sense that, oh, I'd like to give something back. So a desire to repay for some benefits maybe they received over their life, that they just feel that way. And then there are many intrinsic and otherwise types of benefits that volunteers can get from volunteering for your organization. Feeling of emotional satisfaction for whatever reason, even gaining some increased job skills. Even the people that are older always like to learn new things and so forth. Building or enhancing a resume in that sense. But in particular, sometimes it's even just loneliness, or the fact that it's not real loneliness in that sense, but it's people are social in general, and they just want to make some social contacts out there. And so some volunteers are simply looking for the benefits that they'll get for volunteering. And one thing that we really have to understand is that there's intense competition for volunteers out there. They do not just fall off the vegetable truck in the morning and beat down your door or your message board trying to work for you. There is real competition for them. They are appreciated and they have to really be treated just like all other employees. So you have to think about the type of job that you're going to ask in a volunteer to do, just like you would a paid employee. So you can't take all the lousy jobs and tasks in your organization and put them together in a job and try and think that you're going to find some volunteer who's going to want to do that and come in regularly and do that for your organization. No, these are people just like the rest of us, workers. And just because they're not working for pay does not mean that they want to do and have a terrible day at work every day. Boring, repetitive jobs that are obviously something that nobody else will do. You won't get people to volunteer for that. So be realistic. Be fair about it. Think about how you can put together a job that will provide an interesting experience, some of the benefits that you think people would really like if it makes them feel good, and then make it have enough variety where if you have to include something distasteful, then make it in small amounts and spread it around and make sure that the volunteers also see that some of your paid staff is also doing some of the things that nobody really wants to do. So managing your behavior in nonprofits is the same as managing the behavior in a for-profit. You pay attention to your workers, try and understand their needs and wants, and then you proceed from there. So you do the best practices that you can find. You see, what am I going to get out of the volunteers and what is the downside? Because someone will have to manage the volunteers. So that means some time and energy. Do you have to hire a separate person to do that? Are you going to have a decentralized or a centralized sort of approach to how you manage those volunteers? So there are benefits, and there are certainly disadvantages as well. And you have to handle that right so that you have a workforce that's integrated with both paid and unpaid staff, and that you are not taking away a job from a paid person to use a volunteer in an unpaid sort of way. That just simply can't happen. So best practices are really assessing your need, determine why you need those volunteers. It could be that you just need them occasionally, an episodic volunteer for revenue streaming events and things like that. But on the other hand, you really have to treat them like people. There are costs to recruiting, supporting, and managing volunteers just like regular employees. So you have to make decisions. The benefits of using volunteers is that they certainly help you increase your connections with clients. They also help you increase connections with the community in general. They will add some energy and passion to the culture in your nonprofit. And some of these connections could lead to some increased revenue, some increased donations or funding of some sort. The downside is, like I've said, they do cost some time, money, and effort. So there is that. They will change your cultural dynamic to a certain extent. It does add another layer of managing and accountability and so forth. And they definitely will affect your ability to offer programs. So you want to find jobs that fit your organizational needs. So maybe you don't have a job that you need a volunteer there for every day, but you might need them once or twice a week or at some frequency. Well, you determine that and you think about it in the same way that you would think about any job that you would create for your organization. Think about jobs that don't require specialized skills so that anybody at any life stage, age in other words, can come in and say, oh, I could do that. And their work is honest and not demeaning and not repetitive and boring to the point of monotony and so forth. You don't need specialized skills does not mean it has to be a lousy job or a boring job. So it also could be that you need someone with particular skills, but you can't afford to hire someone to that has those skills, and you simply can't afford it. So you might be looking for someone with a certain type of expertise. Here's where you're looking for volunteers, probably who have retired and have careers, who have skills and expertise. Try and find them. Try and find a viable job that offers them some sort of personal satisfaction that you know is a motivator for people, and create a job that you hope you could get someone to take. Now, episodic jobs, certainly many nonprofits have to create income earning events, and these may be annual events, seasonal events of all types, several a year of varying levels of activity and all of that. These require episodic volunteers. You want to create meaningful jobs during the event. You also want them to have a good experience so that they will want to come back and help you again. And it just takes some common sense and being realistic and so forth. And then certainly don't forget about the virtual volunteer. There are plenty of times that you can use someone who just wants to work from home, who has the ability and the access to the internet and so forth, has their own PC, and they can do a job that you really do need done, but there's no sense for them to use transportation or anything or come into your office. So those are jobs also that you could provide for volunteers. So like I alluded to earlier, you could take a decentralized approach in managing these volunteers, or you could take a centralized. Decentralized means you probably have volunteers out working in different specific programs, and they would be supervised by the leaders of those programs out wherever they're working, in the field or in another office or wherever. There's an advantage that you can match the skills and the interests to the activities and so forth. The disadvantage is it's kind of an uneven experience for volunteers, because some leaders may be adept at being a manager and some may not. So they may not get the best experience. And it also limits your flexibility somewhat to reassign volunteers as needed if they're not reporting to one place, which is what you would have under a centralized approach. Volunteers managed out of a single department by a single supervisor. And quite often this is done by the assistant director in small nonprofits and so forth. One of their duties will be they are managing the volunteers. They're the one that sets the final schedule for who works what, does the approval on the final job description, and schedules the assessments just like the regular employees have, and all of that. And so there is advantages to both sides. The centralized approach really does seem to be the greatest advantage to the nonprofit. It does facilitate training and coordination among departments if you're centralized like that. And it might be easier overall to make sure everyone gets an assessment on time when they're supposed to get it, instead of one, head of a team might be busier than others and so forth. But sometimes you're dealing with issues where departments want local control versus central control over the volunteers. And there are all sorts of reasons in your operations why that could really be the case. And there are all sorts of other best practices out there, but certainly it has to include the idea that you create a job description for a volunteer when you're looking for one that is just as rigorous and has all the elements in it, and the legalese and all the legal elements that are required in a job description to recruit someone for pay. So thinking about the construction of the job is still just as important. Just because someone's not getting paid is no reason to skimp on this. This helps you get the right person for the job, and it also helps you ensure that they're going to get a reasonable, decent experience out of it that will make them want to keep coming back. So job descriptions matter whether they're regular paid employees or regular volunteers. It's as simple as that. So they're mandatory. Volunteer policies have to be established. You need a budget, because you're going to have to provide time for your personnel, even if it's just another job duty or part of the initial job duties of your assistant manager or director or whatever it might be. But you have to budget that time and so forth. You have to set goals for how often are they evaluated, which jobs are part-time, which jobs are full-time, which jobs are episodic, and so forth. You have to set the dates and do these things on time periodically, just like you would for regular employees. And certainly you do not want to forget the most important policy of all is always recognize achievement. When people do well, recognize it. Particularly for volunteers, this cements the relationship that they feel good about what they're doing, that they are indeed having satisfaction as a motivator versus dissatisfied because nobody gave me a pat on the back for how hard I've worked and my incredibly good contribution. So you also want to just make sure that your overall mindset is just, I'm going to manage them the same way I do regular employees. And you're not going to go around talking about they don't work for pay or mentioning it. And that's not going to be part of the conversation. They're going to be another employee, another worker. Everybody knows who's working for pay and who's not. There's no need to talk about it or bring it into the conversation. So you manage just like you would any other work group. And then certainly you cannot forget about orientation and training. You have to have an onboarding process. Whatever orientation you give a regular employee, a paid employee, you give the same orientation to your volunteers. So they ought to have a clear job description to begin with that lays out all their duties. Well, some of them are also going to need some training, however basic it might be. And so you have to plan for that. You have to allocate the time and resources for it, just like you would for a regular employee. So these are certainly all best practices. Now you can see here's a fairly busy infographic, and I'll let you look at it at your leisure. And it's quite good. It's really a nonprofit organization that is growing vegetables, and they are cooking them, preparing them as well, and they are delivering them to various places, and I would assume some other nonprofits that are distributing the food in various ways. And so in this process, pushing their mission forward, they are able to offer an incredible variety of jobs and so forth. And they're laying it out exactly for people here, what I've been saying. Here's what you'll be doing. Do you want to dig in the dirt? We have a job for you doing vegetables. Do you like packaging, doing routine things? We can get you to do that. Do you have a car? Do you like driving around? Do you have the time and so forth? Would you want to do deliveries? Would you want to work in the kitchen? Would you want to do preparation? And so forth. All of these things are laid out, and someone who's interested in becoming a volunteer can look at something like this, and it would be very persuasive marketing in order to, recruit them. So a number to call, how many people they've served, variety and what they're saying that we can get you to do. Look at all your choices here. And here's all the great things that you can accomplish helping us do. The future of volunteering. Well, since the mid 70s, we see today that volunteering is at an all-time high. I can't speak to what's happened during the pandemic, but certainly overall, volunteering has been on the upswing with growth and probably is continuing to grow, I would say. Particularly now, a lot of people have been volunteering and helping out in various capacities, even during the pandemic, as best as they're able. Volunteering by age group, particularly 64 years of age and older, is increased by 2/3 since the 70s. Volunteering by people 65 and older is often at the pace of 100 plus hours per year. But we do have the old volunteering versus the new. Old volunteering has been in the past, really, and we talk about the early 20th century and all the way up through World War II and a little bit into the 60s and 70s. That was still the old volunteering, very much based on a religious connection quite often, or some political motive or something like that. Motivation by a sense of membership and altruism, that you want to do something that's just for the common good and so forth, concern for the common good. The new volunteering is a little bit different. It's not about loyalty to the older organizations that have been around a long time. The old volunteering was about loyalty that organizations that were nonprofits that did good things when you were growing up, you got to know them and you were familiar with them. I'm talking about like the Red Cross and Salvation Army, Goodwill Industries. Those sorts of organizations have been around a long time. They're part of the old volunteering, yet they are still here and people still support them and they are still doing well considering. But the new volunteers today, the younger ones in particular, not as particularly brand loyal, you would say. They're not as loyal to older organizations. They're a little bit choosier. In fact, I would say much choosier about what duties they'll perform. And they really do want to get some personal satisfaction or a personal benefit from doing the volunteering. So looking to the future, older persons are certainly going to be one of the larger groups um, of contributing volunteers. That just makes sense. They tend to have more time on their hands and so forth. Um, and I think maybe what's most important here is that organizations, nonprofits have to be very careful that they do provide meaningful jobs and meaningful experiences for people. Because those who volunteer and don't have those good experiences tend not to volunteer again in the future. Okay, folks, that's all I want to talk about this time. I'll talk to you again soon.